this is a nothing. Yes, did they play perfect? No, they still win. Yes.
What are you doing if the Celtics win the championship?
If the Celtics win championship, I might break my sobriety. I might act up.
We did it! You got him.
All the way.
Celtics versus Heat. Celtics in what?
4.
Celtics versus Knicks. Celtics in
4.
Got Celtics in 4? Hell yeah.
Use a vocab word from a couple years ago. It's mind-boggling.
That's it, GRG. Let's go. What do you think tonight? You think I'm worried about the Warriors? I ain't worried about the Let's go, baby. 18, baby. Load up the boat.
Why would you say that?
Because
I'm not. No,
recently he's putting up games like
above our head for the players.
literally right now.
But I think when Marcus, especially Marcus, when he got traded, I think that was a wake-up call.
You think right now
Rob,
it's still New York?
I do. And when I think of the Celtics dynasty, honestly, one of the first names that comes to my mind is actually Brad Stevens.
Whew. You know, I want to come on here and be all like, you know, pouty. Oh no, we lost. But I don't know. So the vibe's not really there. The vibe's not there for me.
It's because we won so many games in a row now. We used to go back and forth, and now look at the winning streak.
Want to know why we're happy? We have something new to talk about.
Right. Yeah, there we go. Right. Hey, Seamus said that on like, didn't he say that on like, I want to say a show like a month ago. He was like, just give us something new to talk about, please. And we got that.
I know we said it after the show. We were like, all right, the back and forth stuff is old now. We need more new content out of this Celtics team. Otherwise, this is just we can't keep talking about the back and forth nonsense. We got to have something new. We got to win again. The losing was actually cool for a little bit, as actually Justin would say tonight. I mean, he would if Justin was on tonight, he would be talking great about the Pistons tonight. But ultimately, the losing, gave us a couple of views out there, but we needed wins. We needed wins. After a while, it was like people are like, oh, they're losing every night. They're not doing anything. But the wins came, and now the losses. Now they don't feel as bad. They don't.
Right.
They really don't.
Well, guys, welcome back into another Celtics Talk weekly post-game show. I am your host, Rob Paytayan. Joined with me are my lovely co-hosts, Nick Franco, Seamus Darlingo, and David Karras. Guys, again, thank you so much for joining us. The Celtics tonight, well, their 6-game win streak, their 6-game win streak was snapped on the second night of a back-to-back in Detroit, 117-97. Was your final score, guys. From the Detroit side of things, they're red hot right now. Coming into this game, they had won 7 games, longest win streak since 2015, almost a decade, guys. The Pistons had not won 7 games in a row. Well, they just took down the defending champs. They did it in a pretty impressive fashion, guys. Winners of the last 8 games. Detroit, they're starting to climb the standings here. Things are looking good for them. From a Celtics standpoint, though, guys, obviously they were winners of 6, had not lost post All-Star break. We mentioned on last post-game show how we felt coming into this game. It felt a little trappy. Detroit's a team that's playing red hot. Boston had won the last 7 straight in their place. It kind of felt like maybe Detroit was going to get the better of Boston tonight, and they did, guys. So before we talk about all the X's and O's and all of that good stuff, our initial thoughts, reactions, and takeaways from tonight's loss.
Title says it all. For this post-game show, the Celtics got punched in the mouth tonight. It was a very physical game. Detroit had a lot to prove tonight, and they wanted to continue that to spread that momentum. And you saw a Celtics team who were alternating players almost out of this back-to-back. You have Jaylen Brown sitting out tonight, and you have Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford returning back to the lineup. It was a kind of an abysmal game for the Celtics, and something that they could have avoided a lot more. I think obviously you're facing a team while you're being fatigued, but it was a lot of mental lackadaisical errors. There was a lot of turnovers in the first half that led to a lot of easy points for the Detroit Pistons to gain that momentum in the first half. Then you saw the Celtics fall back during that second half of the second quarter, and they made it a tied game. And during halftime, it didn't seem like many adjustments were made. I feel like the comeback was mainly based on the fact that the 3-point shot was falling for the Boston Celtics, because after that first half, the Celtics didn't win any other categories. The Pistons had them beat in turnovers, fast break points, rebounds, blocks, you name it. You just saw a team that was putting it all out there. And I'm thinking back to what you said yesterday, and Rob, with the Pistons, and after seeing tonight's game, it seems a little bit more viable to consider them contenders in the East because of the slowed down progression of the other teams like the New York Knicks, and you're starting to see the teams that we're used to competing with starting to phase out or facing injuries at this point in the season. But Detroit played a very physical game. You had the Celtics almost looking frustrated out there. Tatum had a few frustration fouls out there, and then you saw Pritchard, Walsh, and Tatum probably on the court more times than anything else tonight. And it just showed that the Celtics' depth needs to improve, especially being able to take advantage of opportunities late in games to be able to contribute. Because when it comes down to Game 7 series, it's going to take a full rotation, and you need to get those contributions from your depth and not rely too heavily on the 3-point shot, and not try to get Jason Tatum in control of the game. And it didn't seem like he really was there tonight. A lot of turnovers during that first half, and was able to score a little bit more in going into the fourth, and tried to make it a little bit more competitive. But when you have these rotational guys playing on the court with Tatum while everyone else is subbed out, I want to see if there's a way that the Celtics can figure in a way to add a Kristaps Porzingis to those rotations, or a Drew Holiday, Derek White, have them coming in alongside Jason Tatum, so he has at least something else to look out for and be able to have another viable threat. But rough game all around, and it was to be expected. A trap game against a team that's on the uprise, and this could mean something a lot more when it comes down to playoff time. But there's a big weekend coming up ahead, and just making sure you came out of that game with health and having your players ready for Friday and against the Cavaliers is the number one priority for this team, but no excuse to take a game off.
Yeah, for me, like it was already said, just feels like a typical, we looked like a team on the second night of a back-to-back, just a step slower. A stat here that I'm looking at is that the Pistons had 29 fast break points in this game. 12 of those came in the first frame. I wrote about in the article that they averaged 19 fast break points a game. That's second in the NBA, only behind the Nuggets. So we knew this was going to be a problem that they were going to try and exploit, given that the Celtics are A, undermanned tonight, and B, on the second night of back-to-back, and they really made us pay running all night. Just a weird game for me to watch. I mean, I don't take too much stock in this. We can't win every game, and we go from winning 10 of our last 11 and now 10 of our last 12. The sky is falling. But
Right.
basically, it was a little weird to me. This is only the second loss this season when Jason Tatum scores 12 points in the first quarter. Yes, we did live and die by the three, and obviously we shot a lot better from three tonight than we did last night. Last night we shot, I think, under 30% from deep, and tonight we shot over 40% from deep. But I thought our best stretch the whole game was that period where we went on an 18-5 run in the first quarter after falling behind 13-2. Tatum, Holiday, and Porzingis were taking it to the hole. I thought, and you mentioned that at the end of our post-game show last night, Rob, I thought that was going to be the whole game plan tonight. And obviously we'll talk about Porzingis. He didn't really have a great game tonight, but coming into this game, seeing a double big lineup, Pistons having a little bit more of an undersized front court, I thought it's going to be okay. Feed Porzingis, like you said, give him 20 shots, get Horford his opportunities as well, and dominate them down low. And it's weird to say that. I mean, I'm obviously happy with our 3-point numbers. I mean, I'm not going to complain about shooting over 40%, but I do wish we went a little bit more down low. And then obviously the turnovers were uncharacteristic. 17, our average for the season is a little bit under 12, and we had 10 in the first half alone. And then we just got out rebounded as well. So give credit to this Pistons team. Reminded me a lot of how they played in that first matchup in December, on December 4th, where we won that game pretty handedly, but they did the same thing they did in that game. I felt like they did tonight, where they brought the on-ball pressure with like a guy like Marcus Sassier. Literally made it look like the Celtics were dribbling a beach ball out there with how many turnovers and ugly plays we had out there. So, they played super hard tonight, and yeah, I can absolutely see the vision now even more with the Pistons creating some chaos in the playoffs in a couple months from now.
Yeah, the Detroit Pistons, I will say, I still don't see them as a legitimate threat to the Boston Celtics in the East, but this is certainly not a team you want to see in the first round if you're thinking you're going to go on a long playoff run and want to have a full tank of gas at the end, because the Detroit Pistons can certainly take anything out of a team in the first round. The Pistons could find themselves in the semifinals this year, who knows? But even in a first round matchup against a tough opponent, I think the Detroit Pistons, they're gonna potentially force a fifth game, a sixth game. They're not gonna be this team who just comes in there and gets swept off the floor. Like I said, they could even find themselves in a matchup where they win a series. But to the Boston Celtics side of things, the Detroit Pistons I don't think are a legitimate threat, because the Boston Celtics, they're just too good of a team for this Detroit squad. But they certainly have things they need to clean up moving forward. And David mentioned a lot of the numbers in this game, but let's really go over all of them. The points in the paint, 62-20 tonight for the Detroit Pistons. And that really goes along with the fast break points, which were 29-8, as David already mentioned. And then there's everything else, the rebounding battle, the second chance points battle, second chance points, 15-9 tonight, rebounding 61-40 in terms of rebounding and the advantage for the Detroit Pistons. But even points off of turnovers, the Detroit Pistons, now the number actually kind of stayed a little even keeled throughout the second half, but the points off of turnovers, 24 points off of turnovers tonight for the Detroit Pistons. And that's ultimately points the Celtics could score themselves, yet they're giving to the Detroit Pistons in order to score themselves. And what you see in that number is really a lot of those points off of turnovers for the Pistons came in the first half. And really thinking about this game, you look at the lead tracker, of course, that we'll look at in a second, and the Pistons certainly really ran ahead of the Celtics in the second half, because the Celtics had a chance in the middle of this game. But you can't put yourself in a hole if you're the Boston Celtics early on, because maybe if the Celtics don't do that, the game is actually closer in the end. And even though the Pistons went on a run in the second half, the Celtics could have been there at the end to maybe say something about it, yet they just weren't whatsoever, because they had to dig themselves out of a hole before they ultimately created one for themselves again. And really is an uncharacteristic game for the Boston Celtics. Dave, you already mentioned it, with the 17 turnovers and just the 3-point percentage as well. The 3-point, everybody will look at the 3-point percentage and the amount the Celtics shot tonight. And living and dying by the three is certainly a good phrase for that, because the Celtics, 21 of 49 tonight, 42.9% for the Boston Celtics. Usually when you see that mark, and this is why I don't like a lot of people just looking solely at the threes during wins and losses. Oh, we made a lot of threes. Oh, we won. Oh, we missed a lot of threes. Oh, we lost. Well, obviously that's not always going to be the case, depending on what the rest of the game looks like. Tonight, the Celtics shot over 40%, but that's going to be negated when you make only 12 two-pointers. 12. I believe that we got to have a check on this. Is that a franchise low for the Boston Celtics? Is that what they were talking about in the on the broadcast? They were talking about that, how this would be a franchise low for the Boston Celtics. I mean, the previous low was the Celtics making 14 field goal attempts against the Toronto Raptors back in 2016. They mentioned that on the broadcast. Well, tonight, folks, 12 field goal makes from the Boston Celtics. I mean, that's really when you see the three-pointer isn't going to matter that much ultimately when you're only making 12 twos. And that was just the story of the game for the Boston Celtics is the turnovers, the letting the Pistons run in transition, the letting the Pistons be tougher than themselves. And really, if we saw this performance a month ago, we would be shouting to the rooftops more about it because of how horrendous it was.
Right.
However, I will
Right.
say the recent winning as of late has really just leveled that out for the Boston Celtics. And the expectation is, of course, David, you already said it yourself too. We don't expect them to win every single game, but we want to see them win consistently. And that's what the Celtics have been doing lately. I mean, they came into tonight with a streak of their own. The Pistons, of course, they extend their streak, but the Celtics, they were 11-3 in their last 14 games ever since that Lakers the Lakers game was just horrendous. That was really the last. I mean, that was really, I want to say, the last of the January nonsense. After that, it really got better. 11-3 since that game. And the Celtics losses, including tonight, a little bit more explainable. Tonight on the second night of a back-to-back, you don't have, of course, Jaylen Brown, a huge key player if you're the Boston Celtics. And really, you have a couple of big games coming up. So the Celtics, to call this a trap game would have been correct. And that's exactly what it was, because the Detroit Pistons, they're still not that team that I would say the upper echelon of the East fears, yet they're going to be in coming years. They're kind of in that magic tier right now where it's like, all right, Detroit, Orlando, we're kind of waiting for you guys to really rise above the rest. We know they're right there. We know they're threats, but they're not quite amidst the top of the East yet they'll give they'll give teams in the first round, players in the first round, a battle. And that's what they did with the Celtics tonight. I mean, this was, I don't want to call it the Detroit Pistons Super Bowl because I think that would be a little disrespectful, because I think they come to play every single night. But this was a kind of a prove it game for them. I mean, they have that 7-game winning streak coming in, and this is against the defending champions. You have them on the second night of a back-to-back. You have them at home, and you also have them in a spot where the Detroit Pistons, they gave us a run earlier this season already a couple of times. And although they were kind of lopsided scores, the Pistons actually played with the Boston Celtics in those games. And coming into tonight, I think the Pistons had a better motivation. They were on a roll, of course. They know their team a little bit better than earlier in the season. And at this point in time, I would say this Pistons win. I mean, that's really what I'm looking at here is the Pistons really came to play and played well, and the Celtics, they dropped a clunky game, and I really think this isn't gonna persist over the next however many games or weeks. I think this is going to be a one-off like we've seen as of late. We haven't had really many one-offs, and this game was kind of the perfect storm of second night of a back-to-back, guys out of the lineup. You're facing a team who's motivated at home, and the Celtics, they all the numbers they dropped outside of the three-point ball in which they shot well. The Celtics, they dropped every hustle stat. They dropped every stat that really shows how tough they were within the game. And that's just how a young Pistons team is going to play against this Boston Celtics club, especially when they're undermanned and a little gassed from the recent stretch of games coming out of All-Star break, winning 3 in a row, playing last night. And then tonight, the Celtics, they just dug themselves a hole too early, came back, looked like, hey, maybe the Celtics are going to come in and steal this game. But the Pistons, all throughout the second half, it was their game to really go out and win. I mean, once Malik Beasley started hitting everything, from
he started doing
three,
his
the Celtics
dances,
just couldn't hit anything and kept turning the ball over. I mean, that was the story of the game. So moving forward for the Boston Celtics, this isn't going to be a huge concern or a huge problem, but tonight's game was nothing pretty, certainly for the C's.
Not at all. And I'm going to give a lot of credit to Detroit tonight. They came to play. This is a team that was on a 7-game win streak, but those 7 games were really not filled with much competition. Philly, Charlotte, Chicago twice, San Antonio without Wembanyama, Atlanta, and then they just beat the Clippers the other night on Monday at their place. So this is a game which you look at from the Detroit side, they're picking up some momentum, wins in the NBA or wins in the NBA, right? Sure, it's against the Bulls and in the lower tiers, right? But once you start to rack those games up in a row, you start to get hot, you start to get momentum. Detroit, they came in with all the momentum and they played a really physical, impressive 48 minutes of basketball. So credit and hats off to the Detroit Pistons tonight. They wanted it. And on the flip side, from the Boston Celtics standpoint, they didn't want it. Their second night of a back-to-back, down their Jaylen Brown, one of their leaders, and they kind of came in and they said, we're going to go through the motions tonight. If we can get it done going through the motions, awesome. If we can't, then so be it. And Detroit said, you're absolutely not about to roll into our place and go through the motions and beat us. So I think Boston, I'm looking at the box score right now. They made 33 total shots. Like throughout the entire 48 minutes, they made 33 shots. Like that's pretty terrible. And you're just not going to win a game like that. Seamus, you alluded to it. If this is a game back in, January that we had just previously looked really good Tuesday night or Monday night, if it wasn't a back-to-back and we're fully healthy, we come in and we drop this game. It's a way different story. Guys, a positive. The Celtics have the next 2 weeks back at home. So you talk about, okay, what do the 2024 Celtics do really good that the 2025 Celtics really haven't? You drop a game, that's fine. How do you respond? Go rip off 6 more back at home, right? Build that confidence. And I think tonight, I said it last night. It's a trap game. Detroit, this is kind of one that for me wasn't a scheduled loss, but you look at the context of how the past week and a half, 2 weeks have gone for each team and what they look like. It was a trap game to the fullest. So overall, I was not too pleased with what I saw out of Boston, but more so I was watching thinking, oh my God, this Pistons team, man, they are physical. We talked about last night, David, just how do you go about guarding Jason Tatum? And JB Bickerstaff and Azar Thompson said, hold my beer, I will show you. Because they played and I know it's weird. It's really weird because you look at the box score, you look at Tatum's shooting percentage, and you think, oh, maybe no. This was a bad Jason Tatum game. 27.6 rebounds, 3 assists, 10 and 19 from the floor. He was efficient, but guys, 4 turnovers coming in that first half. He had no control over the game. And that's what we talked about. How do you stop Jason Tatum? How do you go about defending Jason Tatum? Well, first of all, you get a guy like an athletic freak like Azar Thompson. Not many teams have a guy like that. And you play however Detroit played him tonight, guys. So, I mean, a lot of respect to how they played Tatum because they completely took him out of the control of the game. And I haven't seen Tatum not control the game in a long time. And he had zero control over it.
Yeah. And I forget what quarter it was in, but one of those 4 turnovers right after he turned it over, he committed that frustration foul. And that's when I was like, oh, wow, like, they're really getting to him. And
right.
Yeah, you look at the numbers, 19 field goal attempts, 50% of them basically coming from 3. I mean, that's what we talked about last night, is just trying to force him to take more outside shots. I thought he was at his best in those little moments right before the first half when he had a nice layup over Isaiah Stewart, I think. And when he was, driving to the hole himself for the first 2 points of the game, I think, for the Celtics. And then he found Porzingis for that and one early as well.
Right.
That's the best we saw out of Tatum, in my opinion, tonight, is when he was driving to the hole. Had a slam, I think, at some point in that third quarter. And yeah, he had that stretch. I mean, he obviously had a great first quarter scoring wise. He had 12 of his 27 there in that first quarter, and he heated up. But absolutely, they did a great job defending him and closing out on him and making it so the other players had to keep us afloat, like a Derek White, who played great tonight. But this game would have looked a lot more ugly if it wasn't for the timely shoot from Derek White. And credit to the game plan there from Detroit and shutting down Tatum.
It was too funny to think. I was sitting there thinking, wow, I mean, just last night we were saying, I don't know if you can. Hey, can you not guard Jason Tatum? Has he really figured this whole thing out? 3 assists, guys. That's the number that jumps out to me. 6 rebounds, 3 assists. They took him out of the game. He had no control. I mean, this is a guy that's been averaging right around upper high of 8 assists per game over the past month of basketball. And to hold him to 3, they had him. They got him frustrated. We're going to talk more about it, but let's look at the lead tracker, guys. It pains me to even press this. Let's take a look at the lead tracker, because also last night, guys, we were talking about the sea of green we're starting to see, and now it's a sea of blue.
Blue wave.
Yeah, it's the blue wave.
Of a puddle there for the Celtics.
It's really a polar opposite of how last night went. But again, you can see here, Detroit, I mean, they controlled this basketball game. Their largest lead of the night, guys, 23 points. Boston only led by just that little sliver there, and they were playing from behind essentially the whole game. Not many lead changes. not many times tied, really just a game of runs with Detroit taking over the game and Boston trying to claw back, guys. Now, again, we've talked about how a game like this at this point of the year, we feel a little bit more comfortable with out of a Detroit Pistons and Boston Celtics standpoint. Because we've seen Boston get more success as the time goes. But again, you look at Boston here in this game, and from playing from behind, this is a team that doesn't play from behind much. And when they do play from behind, it kind of feels like they can do it in a split second and come back. And we saw that tonight, guys. We saw that in that second quarter going into the half. What did they fail to do in that second half? Because we talked about it a little bit, but this game was, Seamus, you said this game was dead even at half. And you're sitting there thinking, okay, new game, right? New one half of basketball to decide this thing. And then just the dominoes fell. And next thing you know, Detroit's up by 23 and Malik Beasley is doing some dances I've never seen before.
I think for me, what the Celtics completely failed at is to really match Detroit's energy in this game. I thought even in the moments which the Celtics came back, the Celtics, we kind of already said it with Jason Tatum. The whole team wasn't controlling the game. I thought from an offensive standpoint, all of the buckets were much harder than what the Detroit Pistons were getting on the other end of the floor. I thought the Pistons, they were just playing with more energy than the Boston Celtics and really getting the buckets they wanted to get. And then on the defensive end of the floor, the Detroit Pistons really hounded the Boston Celtics and gave more effort on that end. And it felt like any effort the Celtics really gave at times was just negated by all the effort the Detroit Pistons were giving in this game, because really looking at it, the Celtics, they had chances. They really did. They dug themselves a hole in that first quarter. I mean, you start the game out 0-0, but when you, of course, go down by that much in the first quarter, it's 13-2 at one point. The Celtics, they dig themselves out of that hole, actually grab a lead going into the second quarter, but then ultimately, or sorry, not going into the second quarter, but at the beginning of the second quarter. And then at halftime, it's a dead even sprint to the end. I mean, the Celtics had another chance right there. And then you even look at the dip right before the fourth quarter, it looked like, okay, the Celtics, they're making their way back a little bit. The Pistons are certainly adding on to that lead in the third quarter, but the Celtics, they still had a little bit of a chance there to claw their way back into the game. And then from that point on, the Pistons just made shot after shot. Celtics couldn't get anything going on the offensive end of the floor. And then you saw the Pistons really hyping up the crowd. I mean, the Detroit Pistons, you got to give credit to some of their fans, because they've had one of the more empty arenas in the NBA for the past couple of years just because of how that team's been performing in Detroit. Yet now it seems like the fans in Detroit, I will say, even when they were performing terribly, Pistons fans, they wouldn't show out numbers, but their noise would always show out in those games. You had all the diehards. I kind of look at it. The Tampa Bay Rays years and years ago, they were terrible late 2010s. Yet all of the diehards would go to the game. You have all the casual fans exit the arena, Tropicana Field, right? But who stays? It's the diehards. The diehards are watching all the terrible games. So the Detroit Pistons, they always had a large, loud fan base, I will say, at their games, even though fans weren't going whatsoever. Yet now as they're starting to win games, Cade Cunningham made an all-star appearance, more people are starting to trickle into that arena, and now the team's interesting in Detroit. That sound in that building, there's more sound, you can tell in there. And that arena, it's still a fairly loud arena, even though they have one of the lower capacities in the NBA in terms of fans actually showing up to their games. But that was really what went wrong for the Boston Celtics. Is the Detroit Pistons played with more energy. The Celtics, it seemed like everything was coming harder for the Celtics than the Pistons. And then the Pistons, once they got the crowd going under them, I mean, they just had that energy, they had that effort, they had that motivation from the crowd. And the Celtics, they just kind of had that vibe of, all right, it's time to roll over. And it's kind of indicative in that lead tracker, especially in the fourth quarter. The largest lead of the game came in the fourth quarter. Late in the fourth quarter, it was a 23-point game. So when you start seeing something like that, you can tell the Celtics, they just didn't quite have it in the second half, and particularly at that end of the third quarter going into the fourth. And you see it within the box score too. The Celtics, they had a great second quarter, outscored the Pistons by 9. They were outscored by 9 in the first quarter, but then the second half, I mean, particularly the fourth quarter, the Boston Celtics, they only score 18 points. And by that time, it just felt like halfway through the fourth quarter, I mean, the game was finished. So
right.
The Boston Celtics, I thought what went wrong for them tonight is just they didn't really have the same intensity. They didn't have the same fierce nature as the Detroit Pistons. And of course, there's a lot more that goes into that, but just a baseline of the fact of who was actually coming to play, who wanted to win this game. I thought the Boston Celtics were more okay with losing this game, and the Pistons really wanted to win this game. And of course, Celtics want to win every game, but in a game like tonight where you're kind of looking more towards the weekend, you're just coming off of a 3-game winning streak after All-Star break. I will want to say that too. All-Star break, the Celtics, they've already kind of made their footing after, or kind of established their footing after All-Star break. 3 straight wins. That's great. That's great to actually come out and beat 3 division opponents after All-Star break. Tonight, I thought the Celtics, they didn't have the same intensity they had those last 3 games. And ultimately moving forward, I think we will see that more so. But tonight, on the second night of a back-to-back, without really one of your energy shifters, of course, in Jaylen Brown, the Celtics just didn't quite have as much fight as the Detroit Pistons on just a baseline level of that alone.
Oh, and it shows up in the box score. I mean, if you look at all the hustle stats, right? Second chance points, fast break points, you kind of talked about it already. I mean, Detroit didn't only just win them, they murdered the Celtics in them. I mean, 62-20 on the points in the paint, 15-9 on the second chance, 29-8 on the fast breaks. What do we say? 50, I can get it right here. 51-32 on the rebounding. I don't know how many of the 51 were
61.
offensive. Oh, is it 61?
Insane. Maybe it was 60, or I don't know.
I see on ESPN 51.
Okay,
51,
I said
51.
61, so I was wrong earlier.
I mean, it was just, they got absolute. I'm going to see if I can really quick just find the offense. 14 offensive rebounds for Detroit to Boston 7. So I mean, they got, I mean, out hustled, and it was weird. But again, it's like, you know, Franco and David, you're kind of just like at this point, and I know this is such a lazy way to look at it, and maybe you know, after putting so much stock into January, we're not putting enough stock into this game. But, you know, you look at it and you think, okay, it's hustle, right? And hustle is something we were worried about in January, but we're not worried about that. Or, you know, was it more than hustle? Did you see Detroit really take advantage and exploit something that Boston can't fix?
I think Detroit did a good job of taking advantage of the fact that the Celtics were a little fatigued. That definitely had a spot in tonight's game, and you could also see that Kristaps Porzingis wasn't in full effect. Obviously, if he was having a bigger impact on tonight's game, the results may have differed a little bit more. He would have been able to match up in the rebounding categories and also a little bit more in the hustle stats. But you just saw a team that was much more vivacious and also just riding out their effort levels and taking full advantage of whatever momentum they could create. One of the scariest things to see as a Boston Celtics fan is another team, the players starting to get excited on the court. That's when it kind of feels like the Celtics usually can get got. It doesn't seem like they're very good at silencing those types of auras, and once a team sees that slip up in the Celtics' eyes, it kind of just falls apart from there. And you'll see that when Jason Tatum starts to have turnovers, you see he's not able to get other players involved in the game. I thought Derek White had a good game tonight during the first half. He was a major contributor in the first half when we were able to bounce back, but it kind of faded away during that second half. And I think that was due to the conservative effort. One thing the Celtics could have done is made a few adjustments to outride this Knicks attack and really try to settle the game down coming out of the second half and play it at their standards. But once the Pistons gained that momentum back halfway through the third quarter, you just saw the Celtics start to wave the white flag. And I want to see this team fight as much as we can, but we obviously understand that there are reasons why we need to keep our players healthy, keep them rested, and even if the Celtics gave their most valiant efforts tonight in the fourth quarter with the final 8 minutes remaining, the way the Detroit Pistons were playing tonight, it would be challenging for them to even make that push, and it could have just turned into more intensity put out upon the Celtics, and I think it's a challenging thing to see when the Celtics lose in this type of fashion, because it was something we were so accountable for during the rough stretch of this season. But that rough stretch, it feels like it's behind us, and it's one game that the Celtics dropped tonight. And once again, the Pistons did a fantastic job of shutting down Jason Tatum and also not giving him really any outlets to look out to.
Right.
Yeah, for me here, I guess specifically in the second half, this goes back to what Seamus was saying, where you can't just always look at the stat sheet to tell you what went wrong or what went right in wins and losses, because we finished 21 of 49 from three, like we talked about, but we were 14 of 26 shooting in that first half. And in that second half, we only shot 7 of 23 from deep. And we were heading in after the half, tied up at 55. Obviously, it's a tale of two halves there with the 3-point shooting. Like I talked about in my first answer here, I just wish we would have put a little bit more of an emphasis throughout the entire night on taking it to the hole. I think that maybe it could be a different story tonight, at least maybe a little bit closer if we put more of an emphasis on trying to attack the rim. So just like, I guess, adapting on the fly is one thing I'll say that kind of bit us in the rear there in the second half. I mean, it's easy, obviously, to stay with the hot hand. You hit 14 threes in the first half. You want to keep riding that. I wasn't, I didn't hate a ton. I liked most of the 3-point shots they got up. Obviously, like every game with the Celtics, with the volume they shoot at, especially, there's going to be those that you don't like. But maybe just, those in-game adjustments there. But I will say this game probably more often than any other game I've been watching this year, especially the now 17 losses that the Celtics have had. There's a lot of defensive breakdowns, and more specifically in the second half. Like, I remember specifically a play where two of our better defenders, Derek White and Porzingis, I think early in the third quarter, messed up a very easy pick and roll, and Duren just like got a very easy slam out of it, and like that is just so uncharacteristic. There's just a lot of like easy baskets that stem from us just defensively breaking down, and also the Pistons being willing to run. And I don't want to pile too much on this guy tonight, but even though he only played 11 minutes for us, that third quarter was one not to remember for Neemias Queta. The Pistons did a great job of blowing the game open a little bit in that quarter by attacking him.
Yeah.
I love Queta. I love the energy he brings, and I know Justin was not the biggest fan of the way he played tonight, as he talked about in the group chat. It was a rough game for him. That's just a weakness I've seen with Queta this season. Obviously, he's still developing, and this season he's taken a big step in his development. We used him obviously a lot more earlier in the season than we have as of late, but he does get targeted a lot on defense in these matchups, especially from the perimeter. So, a summary of all our answers here, also just with the effort, the rebounding, the offensive rebounds at one point. We ended at 14-7 for the game, and I think at one point it was like 10-2 in favor of Detroit, which was very painful to watch. So yeah, it was just a young, hungry team, like we all said, and Boston did enough to hang around, and then the floodgates opened as soon as Malik Beasley checked in that fourth quarter. He was, we talk about Jaylen Brown being the energy shifter for Boston. He was definitely the energy shifter for Detroit tonight off the bench.
Yeah, you talk about
this onto the defensive breakdown point real quick. It's the hedging and the recovering for the Celtics, and particularly with Queta. He hedges too hard, and he doesn't really have the foot speed to recover most of the time. And that's really when we're seeing some of these pick and roll breakdowns, specifically with Queta out there, but some of the other guys too out there on the floor, is really when they're not recovering well. I mean, you have that wide open lob or that wide open pass to the roller going down the lane, and then from there your defense just breaks down because you're either giving up a wide open layup or wide open dunk, or you're giving up a wide open corner three, in which we saw a couple of times tonight. And I think this was a game too where the Celtics, they just didn't, their communication and their effort wasn't quite there. I mean, it kind of reminded me a little bit of the Mavericks game a couple of weeks ago where the Celtics just got shellacked on trade deadline day, where it just felt like defensively the Celtics, and when we talk about going through the motions, if you're going through the motions within a game, where it's going to show the most is on the defensive end of the floor. There are going to be moments on the offensive end of the floor where you get bailed out, you make a terrible shot, you hit some free throws, you put some points on the board that you really shouldn't. But on the defensive end, every single defensive breakdown is going to end up in a good opportunity for the other team and your opponent. And from that, I mean, you're going to give up wide open threes. You're going to give up good, high quality shots, particularly from around the rim and on the perimeter. And the Celtics, I think they fell victim to that a lot tonight, where they were just not quite giving all of their effort on that end, whether it was communicating or whether it was recovering, whether it was being physical. I mean, really, if you're going through the motions of a game defensively, that's where it's going to show the most. And I think David was quite on point with picking out the defense tonight, because really in that second half, the defense, particularly going into the fourth quarter, the Celtics had a chance. I mean, it was a single digit game. It was still, the Celtics let go of the rope there at the end of the third quarter, going into the fourth, and really going into the fourth. I mean, really, the game was the 11-point game going into the fourth quarter.
Man,
it was a single digit game before that, but 11-point game. And then the start of the fourth quarter, it was the score went to 100 to 81. So there was a 10-0 or a 10-2 run at that point in time. So the Boston Celtics, I mean, they just were not quite there on the defensive end of the floor. And offensively, too, they didn't give themselves any leeway or do themselves any favors by turning over the ball 17 times and allowing Detroit those easy transition buckets. I mean, it was a joke to see how many transition buckets the Detroit Pistons scored tonight. It felt like the Celtics, they just couldn't take care of the ball. And then all of a sudden it was 3-on-2, it was 3-on-1 in Detroit. Those are going to be some of the easy buckets that can really kill you in time. So defensively, the Celtics were not on par tonight, and offensively, they didn't do themselves any favors. And that's why we see the result ultimately that we see in the Celtics. I want to say they're lucky too that this wasn't a worse game, because if they play that way throughout the entirety of the game and there isn't those moments in which they came back, and this could have been a 30-point loss for the Boston Celtics, the way the Pistons were playing, the way the Celtics really came out. And they didn't play consistently throughout this game, but in certain moments, it was just a really, really bad showing on both ends of the floor.
It was. And you talk about the bench. And first of all, I thought Neemias Queta was awful tonight. I mean, this must have been his worst game in a Celtics uniform. He was a traffic cone. And you said it, Seamus. He does not have the foot speed to recover off those screens. And when you're playing lackadaisical, and I don't think Nemi was playing lackadaisical, but I think the guys that he was hedging for were a little bit lackadaisical, and they don't have that show off the back end of the screen. And then it's really, you're leaving Neemias, on a foot race to the paint. And then you don't have that backside help to kind of also show. And it was, I mean, was he great? No. Did he have the right pieces and tools around him to be great? I also don't think he had that. But outside of that, the bench tonight, outside of Pritchard, who obviously we'll get to shortly, you see above us the player spotlight, spoiler alert. But they were awful. I mean, the bench in this, you really can't, this has to be a game that the bench shows up for. And this is really the only aspect that I'm really disappointed in tonight, is that the bench didn't give us more. When you're down Jaylen Brown, you really need to make stuff up, because Brown is such a big part of what Boston does on both ends of the floor in terms of on-ball pressure, which I thought we were terrible at tonight, and in terms of getting into the paint and being efficient down there, which I thought we were also awful tonight. So the presence of Jaylen Brown, or rather the not having Jaylen Brown, not having his presence, was felt tonight. And you look at the bench, guys, 18 from Pritchard, 3 from Hauser, and then a garbage time 3 from Davidson. And I wish I could pull out another stat. I mean, Nemi had a steal. That's it, though. I mean, no one was rebounding. No one was walking with steals. No one was blocking shots. No one was putting the ball in the basket. And on the flip side, you look at Detroit's bench, and they showed up, man. I mean, Malik Beasley was on a heater, 26 points, led the team in scoring. You got Marcus Sasser, 8 points, 3 assists. If you watch the game, his impact did not show up on the box score tonight, because he was a dog out there defending full court for essentially 20 minutes. Isaiah Stewart did his thing, 2 blocks. Ron Holland had 8 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals. So, I mean, they just had more tonight. Boston didn't really have that depth factor that we were kind of hoping to see tonight. And again, no Brown. And then really you take Craig out of the lineup, who has kind of been that 9th man or 10th man. And then no Luke. You really felt that missing presence of Luke Cornett tonight too. I will say, because Luke is a guy, and it really goes to show the improvement of Luke Cornett. And I can't believe I'm saying this, honestly, that we're missing the presence of Luke Cornett, Seamus, because just a year ago, probably to the date, you could go into February and find us arguing on whether or not Luke Cornett should get minutes. But I mean, we could have used Luke tonight. Oh my God, for interior presence, for defense, for that. I mean, Tatum was getting killed out there on the doubles, on those high pick and rolls, and the slip wasn't there. You talk about Neemias Kaita's foot speed; he couldn't get there in time to get the. So the timing was off on offense and defensively. You missed Luke. So to add on to what you guys said, the bench, guys. Oh, it was putrid tonight. It was putrid, and we'll get to Pritchard, but I want to hear out. Don't give me Peyton Pritchard right now because we'll get to him. But outside of Pritchard, what did you guys think of the bench? Because personally, you didn't get anything, and quite frankly, you might not get anything out of these guys on a night like this. But again, you're missing guys, and your roster thins out.
Yeah, as much as we would like to be able to rely on these guys, and it's kind of concerning if you're starting to go into games where your team is struggling or is trying to get rest for your star players, trying to manage those minutes a little bit more. That's something that you definitely need to get out of these guys. And one thing I can say about Neemias Queta is when he's playing, it kind of seems like he's panicked out there. It seems like very unaware of what the situation is. It seems like he's putting out 100% effort out there, but it doesn't really seem very directed. Once he is able to assess his positioning on the defensive end of the floor, not allowing himself to be dragged out too far, not allowing him to be able to be an easy blow by, I think that's when you'll start to see Neemias Queta really come into his own and play at that efficient level we saw earlier this season when he was starting for the Celtics a few games and or getting some key minutes in games and contributing in a major fashion in the paint. But this is why I really think that the Celtics need to focus on having that depth, because I said last night about the Detroit Pistons while we were previewing this game that this Detroit Pistons team is 15 deep of talented players that can contribute. You can see a little bit more of a rotation. It seems like they have a few more guys that they can call the names upon of during games, and it's a benefactor to them. So they, once again, with the contracts that they were able to receive this offseason, they were able to get some guys that were really on prove it deals. A perfect example is like Malik Beasley, who was the Milwaukee Bucks moved on from him this offseason, which they're probably regretting deeply as this playoff approach draws nearer. And you also have all this accumulated talent that you've been able to draft over the past few years from the Detroit Pistons, and it's really all coming together for them piece by piece. And it's aspiring for the Celtics, but it's a luxury that the Celtics cannot really get to, especially with the financial situations they're in over the second tax apron. And just being able to have these guys play a little bit more positionful basketball. A guy I think that could have really contributed for the Celtics if he was out there tonight would be a Torrey Craig. This was a game that almost had his name written all over it. Right. But yeah, I think they're just really. It's rough to see, and obviously Peyton Pritchard had a good performance tonight, but you need these other guys to be able to fill in and also bring a little bit more versatility.
For me tonight, it was. We'll obviously talk about Pritchard in a second, as Rob said, because he was great. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more out of Sam Hauser, and I get it. He only got 12 minutes. There's only so much you can do in 12 minutes, but I almost forgot he was playing until he hit that 3-pointer late in that third quarter, I think it was. And, this is just something I'll go back to with like in-game adjustments where, Porzingis puts up his worst game in a while, breaking his streak of scoring 15 or more points, I think, in like 15 straight games. It was clear, at least halfway through this game that he was struggling. So, you can still go head to head with the front court of Detroit due to them being more undersized, like we talked about. So maybe Porzingis takes more of a back seat rather than 26 minutes he gets, and you roll with Horford at the 5, and then you get Hauser in the lineup just to get a little bit more 3-point shooting. If you were to tell me we were to hit 21 threes tonight and Hauser would have hit only one of them, that definitely would have surprised me. So yeah, again, I would say definitely surprised that Walsh ended up getting more minutes than Hauser in this one off the bench. And obviously, again, there's only so much Hauser can do because he was only given 12 minutes to work with. But would have liked to have seen him be a little bit more involved tonight and given a little bit more playing time, given Porzingis' struggles and Horford being able to be serviceable out there tonight in his 30 minutes.
Well, yeah, the bench. I mean, really, this exemplifies how top heavy the Boston Celtics are and how much they rely on some of their top guys in the start, particularly in the starting lineup, but just even coming off the bench. I mean, when you're missing a guy like Luke Cornett, who's essentially your seventh or eighth man on the night, that's gonna really kill your bench when you don't have much of a bench to show for anyway. If you're the Boston Celtics, and ultimately no Brown tonight, which means somebody had to slot in to the starting lineup. That was Al Horford, which him as a bench guy doesn't even really compute most of the time because, I mean, he really would be a starter if we didn't have a guy like Kristaps Porzingis out there starting at center. But just the bench tonight, I mean, really, you're looking at, yeah, Peyton Pritchard had a great game. He's on the top of the screen right now. Fine performance, 5 of 8 from 3, 18 points. We're not really talking about him right now because we'll get to him a little bit later. But everybody else, I mean, literally everybody else on the bench. Now, Drew Peterson, J.D. Davison, Xavier Tillman, Baylor Scheibman, they came in for 4 minutes and 40 seconds. All of them have the same exact minutes line because that was the garbage time rotation. But looking outside of them, it was Sam Hauser, Neemias Queta, Jordan Walsh, who really played the real minutes off the bench. And yeah, like it's been mentioned, 1 of 4 from those guys from the field. Now, you don't really expect too much offense out of those guys. Now, Sam Hauser maybe a little bit more so out of that group, but Sam Hauser, this is kind of my rip with Sam Hauser this year, is when he's not giving you anything offensively, what is he exactly giving you in a game? Because defensively, Sam Hauser can be a mess from time to time, depending on what the matchup is, and he has better matchups out there for himself, but most of the time when you're facing a fast physical team, Sam Hauser just isn't a very effective player on the defensive end of the floor. And offensively, if he's giving you a stat line like, oh, 1 for 1, took 1 shot in 12 minutes, why is he out there? Why is Sam Hauser out there? Exactly. Yeah. But the reason I will say the answer to the question of why Sam Hauser's out there is because the Celtics, they don't have too much more off their bench. I mean, really, Jordan Walsh, you don't expect him to be a scorer on the offensive end of the floor. He was 0 of 3 tonight. Defensively, Jordan Walsh is more of that player, but he's young. He's young. He makes young rookie. I shouldn't say he's not a rookie. I say he's making rookie mistakes as a second-year guy, and that's pretty common even for a sophomore player because he was in the G League most of last year, as we know. But Queta, we already talked about him. Offensively was just a 0 tonight. Didn't really have any pick and roll opportunities for himself to go and get a lob or get something going down in the paint. No pick putback opportunities either for Neemias Queta. Those are really where most of his points come from. But defensively, we already talked about with him. He can be a little bit of a player that other teams and opponents want to target out there. And that's why we don't see him against some of the more contending teams in the NBA, is because when you get into those matchups against teams who can really pick you apart from a defensive standpoint, Queta is just a terrible player to have out there. I'm sorry to say it, but I really, he's an all right deterror at the rim. But you're going to see defenses time and time again just target him on the pick and rolls, want to get those switches because he's not a perimeter defender, not by any metric whatsoever. If he has to defend on the perimeter or recover back on a pick and roll hedge and recover, that's when Queta, he's just not very effective as a defender. He's big. He's a little quick. His foot speed isn't that quick, but he can get up and down the floor. But Queta on the defensive end of the floor, he's really just he's one of the Celtics' worst defenders, unfortunately, and that's not just because of his ability out there with how his foot speed is and I shouldn't say his size because that is actually what makes him one of his main attributes on the defensive end, but it's really some of his IQ sometimes and his positioning, just where to be and how long to be there, and kind of what he's hedging out on, and of course how he's really positioned on the floor wherever he is and whoever he's defending. The Celtics do have to mask him a lot, and that's what's going to make the Celtics bench. I mean, that's part of what makes the Celtics bench so thin, is that if a guy like Luke Cornett does go out of the lineup, you have a guy like Kata stepping in ultimately and really filling in those minutes, and that sometimes can be a problem for the Boston Celtics. Yet tonight, the Boston Celtics, I mean, they really, if you look at the bench, they really got nothing off the bench outside of Peyton Pritchard. And if you look at the minutes too, the Celtics, they don't really, I would say Joe Mazzulla doesn't really trust his bench that much, and
Nope.
that's something to me that I don't know why you would, because you look at all the minutes. 33 minutes for Tatum, 30 for Al Horford, 25 for Porzingis, basically 26 for Porzingis. And then you have 31 for Derek White, 31 for Drew Holiday. They actually looked like they played together. They both had 31-17 on the night. 31 for Pritchard, but then you look at Walsh, Hauser, Kata, 15, 12, and 11 for those guys respectively. And so you're looking at mostly the Celtics. I mean, if you're filling the minutes tonight, if Brown is out there, if Cornette's out there, Cato, Walsh, and Hauser, maybe Hauser gets himself a couple of minutes, but Cato and Walsh specifically, they probably don't see minutes tonight. I mean, those
No.
Walsh minutes, I mean, I would say Jaylen Brown is probably playing in the 30s tonight, but Walsh and Cato, those minutes are going to Cornette and Jaylen Brown on a night like tonight. And I'll say this too, I believe Cornette, he was a player in which dominated the Pistons early on this season in separate occasions. So Luke Cornett, and that is a fairly big loss for the Celtics. I know Luke Cornett. I will say I don't want to get too far into this conversation here, but national broadcast announcers and even local announcers will just give themselves away. Luke Cornett is usually a player where people give themselves away. They go, "Oh, Cornette, are we going to be talking about Cornette all night, or are we going to be, who is this guy, Luke Cornette?" And it's like, no, Cornette's an actual effective player for the Boston Celtics who will go out there and actually give the Celtics something they need off the bench, especially in a night where somebody is out of the lineup. And the Celtics losing Cornette tonight was just that's it really thins out the bench. It really does. You lose one bench player, you lose one starter. The bench is already thin as is. We've talked about it all season. But when you're really missing players, I mean, that's really what's going to show that and exemplify that to the max. But I do want to talk about ultimately here how local broadcasters kind of give themselves away. It seems like on the broadcast, Scal, he was surprised by the Pistons and he was ready to anoint the Pistons as maybe a contender in the East. And he was almost saying he was almost surprised by Cade Cunningham's passing, which is ultimately, you go and look at the amount of assists Cade Cunningham creates per game. I mean, you don't even have to look at the assist numbers. You can look at anything else. Cade Cunningham is quite the passer, and that's one of his biggest strengths in the game of basketball. But it almost felt like the Celtics broadcast was a little surprised by the Detroit Pistons tonight. But personally, on the season, I think up to this point, we're not surprised with how the Pistons were playing tonight and how they play in general. But are you guys surprised that the Detroit Pistons have been able to turn the ship around from last season to this season and actually become a team that the Boston Celtics maybe don't want to face in the first round?
I don't think they caught my eye during the offseason. Once they added their coach, JB Bickerstaff, I really felt like there was a switch of tides there. And usually signing like Tobias Harris during the offseason wasn't regarded as one of those signings that anyone will really take note of and think it's the marquee addition of the offseason. But he fits in to that rotation like a glove when it comes to what the Detroit Pistons are trying to mold out of their team. You give Tobias Harris those types of situations, or you get guys like Michael Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., or Michael Beasley. He was good. Malik Beasley.
No, Michael Beasley used to kill the Celtics too.
Yeah.
I mean, with the Knicks. I remember he killed the Celtics with the Knicks, and I went, if Michael Beasley, if he gets the Knicks to the 6th seed in New York, is he an MVP candidate? And people called me rightfully crazy for that.
But yeah, you look at all these seasoned veterans who have been contributors. I mean, they have Paul Reed in their garbage minute rotation, who was a solid player for the 76ers before he transferred over. And this is something that I would love the Celtics to be able to add to their team, but obviously CBA, it's extremely challenging to get talented players to join a team, especially on a minimum contract. And the the Pistons really have had this in the works for a very long time. Once Cade Cunningham really stepped on the scene in Detroit, you felt I felt like they were bound to make these steps that they have so far this season.
Yeah, I'm honestly in a similar boat. Like, especially after watching us play the Pistons, like the last few years, they've always given us a run for our money. Like Franco was saying, I mean, the game that sticks out to me from last season is when they nearly handed us our first loss at home. I think in December,
That would have been
January of last
embarrassing.
season.
Ooh.
Right, and they were up, I think, 21 or 23 in that game, and we had to storm back to win that game in overtime. Scal said, I think in this broadcast, he said it last night. I think he also said it today, where, yeah, they had that record long losing streak last season, but they didn't play like a team that lost whatever it was, 26, 27 games in a row. And you obviously see that this year. You're seeing that in this recent stretch where now they've won 8 games in a row. And I think if they continue on this pace, they'll be like the 5th best team in NBA history. They showed the graphic tonight in terms of more like most biggest difference in wins from one season to the next. And obviously the Celtics from the '08 team that won the championship have the biggest delta there. But in the graphic, I think they said that if the Pistons keep on this pace this year, they'll be one of the top 5, top 6 teams in that category. So I think they have a great mix of youthfulness with the Sar Thompson and Cade Cunningham and guys like Duran, and they got veteran presence like Franco mentioned with Harris and Tim Hardaway Jr. So it doesn't surprise me too much. Yeah, I mean, I could absolutely see them making some noise in the playoffs, like I said in my first answer. So yeah, this is just like your typical underdog, fun, scrappy team that probably has a ceiling, but is one that is putting the stepping stones for their future dominance potentially.
Yeah, the Pistons, like I said earlier, they're in that Orlando Magic category almost of the young up and coming teams who maybe aren't ready to make the finals from the Eastern Conference, but are ready to challenge some of the contenders at the top and really give them tough series and maybe later on in time be those top contenders in the Eastern Conference. The Detroit Pistons, I'm personally not surprised at all at what they're doing this season. I mean, maybe they're still overachieving to my standards in terms of I had them the 10th spot this year coming in. I thought they would actually make a run at the play-in, but ultimately, I do see this Detroit Pistons team as a team that this could have happened to last year. I think what happened last year was just really unlucky for them to lose as many games as they did in a row. There were some games in there they barely lost, but in other games they were just completely obliterated. And it was one of those more unlucky streaks when you really look at it. But even that team, of course, their win total wasn't great because of that losing streak. But that team kind of had the right idea. They had the young players and they had the veteran presence that the front office wanted to pair with those young players to kind of compete a little bit, make themselves a little bit more competitive, develop the young players a little bit more. But it just didn't work out. Some of the veteran presence they brought in last year was just, I mean, look at two of them. I mean, I should say Danilo Gallinari was one of them at the end of the season, and he's coming off a torn ACL. You look at some other guys the Detroit Pistons had last year, like Bojan Bogdanovic, and he barely played for them whatsoever. And so I really, I should say, he didn't play for them to start the season. Then he was traded to the New York Knicks eventually, of course, later on in time. And it was just the Pistons kind of fell off a cliff in terms of some of the veterans they had last year that really just didn't contribute the way that they thought were going to contribute. Yet this year, I think you have a lot more sound veterans out there. You have Malik Beasley, you have Tim Hardaway Jr., you have guys like Tobias Harris. Of course, you mentioned Franco, that are out there on the court for the Detroit Pistons that I believe right their ship a little bit more than in the past. And ultimately, the Detroit Pistons, they tried to kind of paint the same map last season, but some of the veterans they ultimately had out there. I mean, you look at Alec Burks. Alec Burks was one of their leading scorers last year. Evan Fournier, we knew completely fell out of the league. Taj Gibson was there. I mean, he doesn't really do anything in the NBA anymore. He plays with the Charlotte Hornets. He's kind of the he's really of the category of Al Horford, Chris Paul, and LeBron James.
He's
He's
in the
a player
Haslam.
who's out there
I
after.
was just gonna say Haslam.
Right, Udonis Haslam. He is out. He's on the Udonis Haslam train right now, where he doesn't play whatsoever, and he's just out there as a culture guy, as Udonis Haslam was. But Joe Harris, his career pretty much ended with the Pistons. Didn't give them anything last year. So you just look down the list. I mean, Shake Milton, Monte Morris, Mike Muscala. He was the other guy. I said two guys, of course. Mike Muscala, Danilo Gallinari, as well. But just all of those guys. And then you kind of have experiments too that didn't work out with the Pistons. James Wiseman, Marvin Bagley, just trying to get guys in there who can they give you something? Can we develop them? And it's like, no, these players just aren't working out in the NBA. But you see this season, I thought the Pistons came in with a more balanced roster, of course, more off their bench. And you think about some of the young guys too, specifically Cade Cunningham. You think about Durant. Ivy was actually playing well this season before he went out and, of course, broke his leg. I believe that was actually on New Year's or around New Year's. It was Jaden Ivey broke his leg, but those players in particular, you even look at some other guys like Ron Holland out there for the Pistons, and Isaiah Stewart. He's still fairly young for them. They get Simon Fontecchio, Marcus Sasser. Fontecchio, he's kind of one of their additions too. They got him at last year's trade deadline. Comes in this season, gives them a little bit of a boost. He was out tonight, of course, but you look at guys like Asir Thompson too. He's out there, he's developing. I mean, all these younger
They're good.
players, they're developing for the Detroit Pistons. And sometimes that development within the younger players, we've seen it in Celtics history before, where you don't necessarily add anybody and you might actually subtract a couple of bodies. You think 2018-19 and 19-20. That 19-20 roster certainly wasn't as good as that 18-19 roster, but that 19-20 roster went to the conference finals. We had a more fun season with that roster. They had a better season because Brown and Tatum, they were given the keys of the car and they actually developed more than that 18-19 season. And what happened there is a pretty good example of what's kind of happening with the Pistons too right now, where you kind of give more of the young guys the keys and you surround them with good complementary talent. And now the Pistons are actually a legitimate threat in the Eastern Conference to make some noise, maybe make it to the semifinals. And I don't think they're finals contenders by any metric, but the Detroit Pistons ultimately are here to play basketball. I mean, Detroit basketball. You saw Jalen Rose there tonight, and he's in the building often. But Detroit basketball is back in the East, and finally, because after years and years and years, the Boston Celtics, they dominated the Detroit Pistons, and now the Pistons are back and ultimately not finals contenders, but certainly contenders to make some noise. But ultimately, no noise came off the Celtics bench tonight, and we talked about it earlier. The Celtics bench was just horrendous, but there was one shining bright spot of the Celtics bench tonight, and that was our player spotlight, Mr. Peyton Pritchard. Our player spotlight presented by SeatGeek. Of course, use code Celtics Weekly at checkout of your first purchase for 20% off of your purchase when you use the code Celtics Weekly at checkout for 20% off your first purchase at SeatGeek. Go check SeatGeek out. Has all the great seats you can find at the arena. Just go out there and search. Go gift people some tickets. The people you love, of course, go get them some tickets and get them to a game. Get them to view the NBA product as ratings are down nowadays. You got to get your people some tickets out there, or yourself. Go treat yourself to some SeatGeek tickets. But Peyton Pritchard, he treated himself tonight to a great performance, a really pretty good game, I would say, by Peyton Pritchard. 18 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 1 steal. Peyton Pritchard also shot 6 of 10 from the floor, 5 of 8 from 3. Peyton Pritchard was the one bright spot off the bench and really the one bright spot on the Boston Celtics. And without Peyton Pritchard, this game might look a little bit different out there ultimately, where the Celtics, if they don't have Peyton Pritchard, they don't have anything off their bench. And outside of Tatum, I mean, Tatum was kind of a problem early on in this game, but wasn't, had his moments throughout the game as the game went on. But ultimately, the Celtics, they wouldn't have had much without Peyton Pritchard tonight. So, you guys, you always know the drill here. Your thoughts on Peyton Pritchard. We'll start with you, Franco.
He contributed tonight in the fashion that we needed him to, and this is the type of performance that you would expect to hopefully receive out of Peyton Pritchard in one of these games where you have a starter out of the lineup and you're trying to bounce back from a back-to-back. You have a few guys on the court that are a little fatigued, a little beat up from the last game, and Peyton Pritchard was able to do that, shooting efficiently from the court, being able to attack the rim down low, at some good 3-point looks that helped keep this team afloat during this game, and also was a part of that second quarter run that brought the Celtics back into this game before halftime. He really is a player that has established himself as a versatile and a energy affecting player on the court. He took a big hit from Isaiah Stewart during the game. I thought he got spear tackled by Ray Lewis, but it was just he was able to bounce back up from that and continue to carry out this team. And he was one of the only players that was really able to match or make up for Tatum's poor performance, and also not Tatum's poor performance, more to highlight the Detroit Pistons' great defense that they played against the Boston Celtics tonight. Really took Tatum out of the game at some points. It was forcing him to get bad looks, but Peyton Pritchard was efficient from what he was offered, and that's something that the Celtics need to find that balance of, which was last year we sometimes saw Tatum being a little too nice with the basketball, spreading it around a little bit more, trying to get everyone else more involved. And now this season, you're starting to see Tatum become that more point of focus where those looks are starting to come into play just naturally instead of being forced. But Peyton Pritchard is one of those players that can get you out of those situations where your team isn't able to score at that type of clip.
Yeah, for me, I mean, just a typical Peyton Pritchard night tonight, a typical night that he's had in February. I know he's had a couple off games this month, but I mean, just credit to him for bringing it 2 nights in a row. It's definitely uncharacteristic to see a guy come off the bench and be given you lately 30 plus minutes off the bench, and he's done that 2 nights in a row. Obviously, 35 minutes last night with 20 points, and 31 minutes tonight with 18 points. Yeah, nothing crazy for me to say, I guess, on Pritchard's performance tonight. I mean, and that's a good thing. He just continues to do what I felt like tonight he's done all season. Just hit timely shots, like Franco mentioned. Find ways to, mix up his game. Like, I think he's just done a way better job this year, and this is part of the reason he's taken this ascension into probably becoming the sixth man of the year this year, is the fact that he's not just relying on a 3-point shot to rally up all his points. Like, he's going downhill, and he's not afraid to use his body to get higher percentage shots down low. And he does a little playmaking as well. He had 4 assists tonight. That was second on the team. So yeah, I mean, just a great performance. It's just we're going to bigger picture here. We're just going to need more out of the bench as a whole in this playoff run if we want to repeat, rather than, we know what we have in Peyton Pritchard. We just got to figure out what we have in the rest of these guys, because as we all know, it was, we talked about it briefly last night, and not to do revisionist history and talk about sad Celtics memories, but in that 2022 Celtics playoff defeat to the Warriors, it got to the point in that playoff run where Peyton Pritchard was the only guy coming off the bench. And for the last 4 or 5 months of that season, we were running with just 7 guys straight because it was just, we were so far behind the standings at that point. We figured out something that was working, but that team was gassed. So, we know what we're getting out of Pritchard. His numbers are all up this year, obviously. He's having a career year. He's given us 14 points a game across 28 minutes of action and almost 50% shooting from the field. We just need to figure out what we have from guys 7 and 8 and what else we can get production-wise out of the bench. But, yeah, I mean, thank goodness for Peyton Pritchard. We're very, very fortunate to have him, of course.
Yeah, Peyton Pritchard tonight, it's odd. When the Celtics, there seems to be, and we had a bad December, a bad January. Really subpar months in those regards. And really, there were some games in there that were just awful, awful games where the Celtics just completely rolled over. Those moments, there were some moments within that stretch in December and January that were similar to tonight. And we want to reiterate this on this broadcast that tonight's game, although the Celtics lost, it was I don't want to say better loss, but it was we had better feelings after this loss because of what's been happening and transpiring as of late. Like I said, 11-3 in the last 14 games. That's pretty good for a Celtics team that was basically 500 for 2 months. And that's what the story was around the Boston Celtics. But tonight's loss, it was almost the same vibe of the rest of the team couldn't get anything going and really started to roll over at some point in time. And then you see Peyton Pritchard diving for balls, and he's ultimately injured near the end of that third quarter and into the fourth quarter. I mean, that's what we typically see out of the Boston Celtics when they lose. Is it seems like the rest of the team starts to kind of roll over, starts to mail it in a little bit, and who's out there still diving on balls, giving all his effort, and really just playing his game no matter what. It's Peyton Pritchard, and it's just amazing how some strokes of luck happen in NBA history out there because the Celtics without Peyton Pritchard this year would be a team I would be actually legitimately concerned about. And it's weird to say that Peyton Pritchard is somebody that, makes or breaks the Celtics' ability to win a championship. But if you really look at the entire rotation, Peyton Pritchard is one of the more, if not the most important player on the roster. Now you'd say really the most important player is, of course, Jason Tatum, maybe Jaylen Brown after Jason Tatum. But Peyton Pritchard, for his presence, if the Celtics didn't have Pritchard, they would seriously have nothing coming off the bench. And you're looking at Peyton Pritchard's contract right now, and this is a more bigger picture conversation, but Peyton Pritchard's contract, he's sitting at about $6 million this year. For the sixth man of the year, that is extremely cheap for the sixth man of the year, especially when his market value is probably inching towards that 20 million mark. If you're talking about the sixth man of the year, you're getting him for 6 million, and you're getting him for a discount the next 2 years. You're getting around 7-8 million the next 2 years as well. So the Celtics having Peyton Pritchard come off the bench, this is just like the rich get richer, and that's what the saying is, and that's what the Celtics have within Peyton Pritchard is the fact you not only have a guy who's playing well, but you have a guy who's playing well off the bench for you and who's making just a crazily good salary, a bargain of a salary in Peyton Pritchard, and that has to be mentioned within Pritchard all the time too. Is just the fact the Celtics it's not great for Pritchard. I will say it's not great that Pritchard is playing on a discount. He probably doesn't like that, but for the Celtics, it's tremendous that Peyton Pritchard has that kind of a contract and plays the way he does because in recent years, I'll say the Celtics, they've had good bench help in recent years, but I don't think really since Marcus Morris left the team, have the Celtics really had a guy who could come in and just consistently score 20 off the bench. I know Peyton Pritchard's not a 20-point per game guy, but consistently he can bring you that type of presence where he's inching up towards that 20-point per game mark or 20 points in a game mark. And Peyton Pritchard, he's really the first player who, since Marcus Morris to come off the bench, who can really give the Celtics that presence. If I'm not mistaken, maybe you want to say
Maybe
Rozier. Terry Rozier left at the same time, I will say, though, as Marcus Morris. So, but Terry Rozier always thought he was going to be a starter. He always thought he was a starter. He started in 2017-18, and then, of course, came back the next year, and he was like, oh, how would you feel if you're driving the car? If he said, this was one of the famous quotes, not to go too off track with Terry Rozier, was I went from driving the car to now I'm in the trunk. And that's when you knew that Celtics season was completely dead. I mean, completely dead. Nobody liked
Dead
their
on
role
arrival.
on that team. But ultimately, this Celtics team, the roles are evident. I will say on this particular Celtics team, we've seen a little bit of a shift in how much Jason Tatum handles the ball and handles the offense this year, but it does seem to work out for the Celtics according to the stat that's always brought up. Oh, when Tatum's usage percentage is over X mark, the Celtics are the grab best team in NBA history, whatever it is, right? But ultimately, tonight's game for the Boston Celtics was just a horrendous showing. But the Celtics, they do have a couple of games here on the horizon that I think, if you look at them, the Celtics, they have a great opportunity in front of themselves to really make up what happened tonight, because really the Celtics, this was not a game that I think one of you guys said it at the beginning of the game, that, or beginning of the post game rather, it's not a game that you put too much stock into, because 3-game winning streak after All-Star break, you've already established the footing if you're the Boston Celtics coming out of All-Star break. That was, I think, on the laundry list of to-do things coming out of All-Star break, is just really getting that footing in place and getting some more wins under the belt after, and really extending the winning streak from before All-Star break, and really the winning habits. But this weekend's going to be a big weekend for the Boston Celtics. First on Friday night, and both of these games will be prime time games, of course. One on Friday against the Cleveland Cavaliers at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. That'll be on ESPN. And then Sunday, this one's a Sunday prime time game, and I shouldn't even say it's in prime time, but it's a ABC Sunday Showcase prime time. It'll be at 1 p.m. a Sunday matinee at the Garden against the Denver Nuggets. The Denver Nuggets. And that's really, of course, what we thought. Maybe the Celtics play the Denver Nuggets in the 2023 finals. Doesn't work out. The Nuggets grab the title. 2024 finals, Nuggets Celtics. Doesn't work out. Celtics grab the title. But on Sunday, the Celtics and Nuggets will face each other at the TD Garden. But before that, the Celtics face the Cavaliers. So, from your guys' perspective, between these two games, we have the Cavaliers coming up on the horizon. I think that would be the bigger game in between the two, just because it's first of all, but secondly, facing a team that's in the Eastern Conference above the Celtics. So I'm going to hone in specifically on the Cavs game, but we can also talk macro with the whole weekend, Cavs and Nuggets coming to the TD Garden. But ultimately, what do you guys need to see out of the Celtics this weekend in order for the Celtics to really bring home good performances and good wins against both the Cavs and the Nuggets? Franco, we'll start with you.
Get the ice packs ready on that flight back from Detroit. Get your team iced up. Make sure you're back in your bed. Make sure you have a nice breakfast tomorrow. Make sure you get a good, nice jog in the morning. This team needs to
Good
be
night's jog in the morning. What?
Get a nice, good jog in the morning. I want this team to be nice and refreshed.
It's like going to jog at 3 a.m. That's what Franco just said to the Celtics, basically.
David Goggins.
Albazola probably does that. Let's be honest.
Oh, he's probably running back
He's
from
jogging
Detroit.
to do his jiu-jitsu class at 5 a.m. That's what he's on.
Yeah.
He's got the 2 venti diet like Dan Campbell. I mean, that's Joe Mazzulla.
Yeah. They just need to really just come in healthy. During this next couple games, the past 2 games have been less than ideal, especially with the back-to-back situation and how you're trying to manage minutes, and especially when you're dealing with such a depth crisis when it comes to this team, and it's hard to rely on anyone outside of your top 8 players on this team. So being able to have them be able to bounce back, not have any rust on them, and really strap in for a challenging matchup against the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're trying to make this a little bit more of a rivalry, and since we got the upper hand on them last time we played them, I'm sure they're going to be coming back in, because I'm not. Is this our last matchup with them for the season, or do we have one? Oh yeah, so this is the
Matchup
series
number
finale.
4. Part 4.
Yep, the series finale of the regular season versus the Cleveland Cavaliers, where you get to see if there's going to be a season 2 of that during the playoffs. But you need to be able to bring in a good, confident win at home. If the Celtics can solidify a home presence for the playoffs roll around and throughout the rest of this regular season, that's been kind of the big question mark. One of the only big question marks left on the Celtics is what's going on at home. Why are you guys getting a little bit more complacent when you're on these road trips? They seem a lot more locked in, a lot more focused fresh from the hotel to the stadium. It's more of a complacency thing, but these next 2 games are a huge point for the Celtics in really defining how the rest of the season's going to go. Are you going to be fighting all the way through, or are you going to be able to find that comfortable position either behind the Cleveland Cavaliers or even continue to press the narrative and continue to be in their rear view mirror, being 6.5 games behind at this point in the season? It's a tall mountain to climb, and you'd be having to see the Cleveland Cavaliers really slip up, which doesn't seem like is the case, especially after their addition of DeAndre Hunter during the trade deadline. They're bolstered up and ready for a good stretch. And also the Nuggets, that's been pretty much the dream matchup for the NBA Finals that people have been asking for the past 2 or 3 years now. And that's a game that you have to show out for. You need to get some contributions from Kristaps Porzingis matching up against Jokic, excuse me. You need to be able to make a statement against this team, because for the past few years, it seems like Jokic and the Nuggets have had that upper hand on them. And if that continues going into an NBA Finals, if that ends up being the case where the Celtics are the ones to make it out of the East and the Nuggets are the ones to make it out of the West, the Celtics will remember if Jokic beat them on their home court a few months earlier. And you can't allow that foul taste to sit in someone's mouth, or allow that doubt to be installed in the Celtics' head, because, like I said earlier on the show as a callback, one thing that makes me nervous is when the Celtics team is a team feels like they have a one-up on the Celtics, because it seems like the Celtics kind of fall victim to believing that as well, just from watching the mentality of the other team on the court.
For me, I mean, to quote Joe Mazzulla here, like the Cleveland Cavaliers game coming up on the calendar Friday is the biggest game of the season. Obviously, with it being up against arguably the best team in the NBA and the best team in the Eastern Conference, but it's also the biggest game on the schedule because it's the next game. I will say, as we all know, the 3 games we played against Cleveland this year, we easily could be 3-0. We're obviously 2-1. I went to that first game. I was there in person when we beat them in an NBA Cup game, and then we had a 15-point second half lead in that game on December 1st. And obviously Donovan Mitchell went ballistic in that one to get the win for Cleveland at the end by 4. And then this most recent game from 3 weeks ago, we rode a pretty hot first quarter and hot first half to a victory. And, we made the right plays at the end of the game. So, and this also ties in with that Denver victory earlier this calendar year, where the Celtics are at their best when playing these teams when, we fully expect them to bend, but they never fully break. So, like, these games that we've seen are games of runs where the Celtics or the other team will get out on a hot streak and then the other team will respond. It's just all about rolling with the punches against these great teams, because you could be up, like we've seen these in these games against these teams this season. We've been getting up by a lot, or they've been getting up by a lot, but you can't expect to just be able to stay up 20 the whole game. I mean, if that happens, great. If the Celtics can blow out the Cavs and send a statement, amazing, but that's just probably unlikely given how amazing the Cavs have been along with the Celtics this season. So just bending but not breaking is what I expect to happen this weekend, what I hope will happen for the Celtics this weekend to be able to get these wins. And also, this hasn't really happened since, I guess, Dylan Brooks went off on us. I forget if that was this month or last month, but it's been a while since the Celtics have had, these random players just come out and like torch us from behind the arc or come out and go off against us offensively. Russell Westbrook was that guy the last time we played the Nuggets where he had 25 points and I think he hit like 6 or 7 threes. I didn't love it in this game, and I didn't love it really in any game that we've had a player go off on us against us, like with the Caleb Martins and the Dylan Brooks of the world, where I don't feel like the Celtics do a good job of adjusting to them during the game to try and stop that bleeding. So it goes back to something I said earlier where I just want the Celtics to get a little bit better with like these in-game adjustments again, especially against these contending teams. So, just rolling with the punches. I mean, the perfect example is game 3 against Dallas last year, where we went up 25 and then they made it a 1-point game. Obviously, runs are going to happen, especially when you're on the biggest stage in basketball and you're going up against another team that really wants to win the championship when you're in the final 5 games of the NBA season as a whole. So just understand those runs are going to come, but roll with the punches. Don't let those runs dictate your game plan, and stay with what you know, stay with what you're true to. And also just if things aren't working, make sure that you're, in tune with that sense of urgency to make those adjustments.
I'm honestly a little surprised on how the Celtics kind of structured these last 2 back-to-backs, where I thought tonight's game, now, maybe you look at it and say, all right, tonight's game, the Celtics rolled over and sort of rolled over early to the point where they weren't really playing for most of the fourth quarter. And really 4:40 left in the fourth quarter. That's when the Celtics gave up. That's when the entire garbage team lineup came into the game. But the rest of the game, the Celtics, you do look at some of the 30s marks on the score sheet tonight for guys like Drew Holiday and Derek White, Jason Tatum, of course, Peyton Pritchard as well. Kristaps only 25 minutes tonight, but Al Horford, I believe he was over the 30-minute mark. If I'm not mistaken, Al Horford might have been over 30 minutes tonight. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, it was actually 30 minutes and 5 seconds. So 5 seconds over the 30-minute mark tonight for Al Horford. But you look at it and go, this weekend is going to be a weekend where I really don't expect to see the Celtics bench whatsoever. I really don't. I mean, maybe Peyton Pritchard, obviously. Peyton Pritchard, you're going to see him. And maybe you could see Sam
Chris
Hauser,
Cornett.
maybe Luke Cornett, of course. But this is going to be a weekend where I believe the Boston Celtics, they're going to lock in. They're going to play their playoff rotation. And I think what we're going to see is the Celtics, there's going to be a much different intensity from the Boston Celtics in these games. There's going to be a much different energy. And what I'm really looking forward to seeing is the Celtics playing to the home crowd, particularly on Friday and then Sunday, the Sunday matinee game. I mean, come on, the Sunday games always seem to be pretty loud for some reason in the arena. If you have all the kids off school on Sunday, it's an early game. Oh, perfect game for parents to bring their kids out to the arena because they don't have school immediately after the game. Of course, go to bed right after the game after you get home. So the arena always seems to be a little louder on Sunday, but ultimately these 2 games, they're against competitive opponents, and this is a stretch where you see the 2 games on the schedule. That could be the case in May and June. I mean, you look at the Eastern Conference Finals going into the finals. If the Celtics run upon the scenario, it could be the Cavs first and then the Nuggets in a series. And now you have them back-to-back games in the regular season. And what I'm looking for is the Celtics to come out and establish their footing early with the home crowd and really establish just the presence with the home crowd out there. I think this season, the home crowd has been, and we've talked about this for many different reasons, the home crowd just hasn't been as effective for whatever reason. It could be, of course, more laced with the how the team's been playing, or it could be the fact we talked about it. Tickets are quite pricey at the TD Garden, kind of pricing out the loyal fans out there for the Boston Celtics and the NBA establishment up top in the front offices, the executives up there, of course. But ultimately, the Celtics home crowd, it hasn't been as effective this season, whether it's been the team or the actual fans. And I want to see the home crowd be effective in these 2 games. when we see these two games at home, we faced these teams on the road. Cleveland twice, of course. Cleveland once at home for an NBA Cup game, as you mentioned, Dave. You were there, but even Denver, that was out in Colorado. The Celtics were out there. And now you're at home, back-to-back games. These are opportunities in which the Celtics can bring home great wins and actually lean on their home crowd for. I mean, we've been the whole season, it feels like the Celtics have been more comfortable playing on the road. And when they come home, it's just kind of, maybe going through the motions, expecting to win this game, expecting to win that game. It just doesn't happen. And last season, we saw that home crowd be effective for the first 20 games of the season. And Denver is the team who ultimately came in. The Nuggets came in and ended that streak for the Boston Celtics, made the Celtics 20-1 after 21 home games last year. This year, it's been really far from that mark for the Celtics at home. And yet now, going into these two games, I just want to see the Celtics play to the home crowd. And of course, there's a million other aspects of the Celtics team that has to play well, whether it's shooting from behind the arc, really finding those quality looks. When they're going to either double Jokic or allow Jokic to get those points that he can get by himself. That's kind of the question with Jokic. Would you rather just play him straight up, let him get his points, shut down everybody else, or are you going to double Jokic and kind of let somebody like Michael Porter Jr. beat you from the perimeter? That's going to be the question with Jokic on Sunday. But against Cleveland, that Cleveland team, it's a very different Cleveland team already than what the Celtics have seen a couple weeks ago with DeAndre Hunter in the lineup and even Javonte Green too. I mean, that gives the Cleveland Cavaliers specifically more versatility against the Boston Celtics. And in that scenario, I'm very, very interested to see how the Celtics respond to some of the added versatility of the Cleveland roster, because Javonte Green was kind of a guy that was giving the Celtics a little bit of trouble when the Celtics played them in New Orleans. And then DeAndre Hunter, I'm not as afraid of DeAndre Hunter. I shouldn't say I'm not as afraid of DeAndre Hunter as I am Javonte Green. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying in terms of DeAndre Hunter, I'm just not too impressed by his game overall. He's a fine player, but I don't know how much defensively DeAndre Hunter is going to bring to the Cavs team as much as people expect. But regardless, the versatility is expanded on the Cavs, and their looks are much different on both ends of the floor with DeAndre Hunter and Javonte Green opposed to Karis LeVert and Georges Niang, who we saw last time. And I got to say, too, I'm just glad we're not going to see Niang with the Cavs later on in time. I'm just Niang, maybe we still
Let's
see
throw
him in
in
the
minivan.
playoffs. Maybe we still see him in the first round with the Atlanta Hawks. Who knows? But I mean, man, that guy is annoying to play against. I mean, maybe it's a little bit of a respect thing for him, giving him that respect card, of course. Who's Georges Niang is a competitor in that regard, and you can give him some respect for that. But man, he is just an annoying competitor. I mean, I think he talks the most trash in the entire NBA. But regardless, he's off the Cavs now. The Cavs have a completely different look, and the Celtics going into that game in particular, it's going to be very, very, very interesting to see how the Celtics respond to the added versatility of Cleveland. But I still think this is a game where the Celtics. It's a big game because yes, it's the next one on the schedule. It's against the Cleveland Cavaliers, but it's also against a team that's above the Celtics in the standings, and really one of the only teams above the Celtics in the standings at this point in time. And ultimately, from that scenario, the Celtics, they only really have what fourth of the season left. I want to say at this point in time, there's
About
less than 30 games left. I mean, there's really 20 something games left at this point.
Closer to
24
20.
games, 23, 24 games left in the season. The Celtics don't have much time to really get up in front of the Cavs. Well, this game, if the Celtics lose to the Cavaliers, I mean,
that's out of the question.
probably it's probably kissing the number one seed goodbye. I mean, still time, of course, but this is going to be a big game if the Celtics want to make any sort of run at the number one seed. This is a big game to just give yourself a game, give the Cavs a loss, give yourself a win. That's pretty easy to explain right there, and that's why this game against the Cavs is so big coming up. But ultimately, it's another game too where the Cavs. This is a prove it season for them. The Celtics. They've already proved to the NBA they can be champions. They've already proved in the past, whether it was last playoff series, whether it's been the games earlier this season, they can beat the Cavaliers. The Cavaliers have not yet proven they can consistently beat the Celtics, and we don't want to give the Cavs any confidence or motivation moving forward, and really any film, I would say, that suggests, oh, we can do this, this, or that with X's and O's to actually go and attack the Boston Celtics if you're the Cleveland Cavaliers. So this game moving ahead, I think it's going to be a big one from an X's and O's standpoint for the Boston Celtics to really establish themselves as just the most dominant team in the Eastern Conference. They still have to do it later on in time in the playoffs, but if they do it again against the Cavaliers, now, David, you already said it, you don't expect the Cavaliers to go out and just lose by 20. That's not really what we're expecting. But if the Celtics can go out and execute the way they did in Cleveland a couple weeks ago, that's really going to show us, okay, 4 times against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Say we're 3-1 after those 4 games. The Cavaliers, for as great of a record as they have, they can't beat the one team consistently 4 out of 7 times that they need to beat in order to make it to the NBA Finals. And that's what's going to show the Celtics dominance, or show the Celtics ability to actually get to the finals, whether or not they're the first seed or not. We've seen in past years where championship teams, they've been 2 or 3 plenty of times in the past, and the Celtics, I think they're fine with that if the results play in that manner, especially if the one team above them in the standings, 4 times. If we're 3-1 and that one time was that the blown lead in Cleveland in the fourth quarter, I think the Celtics are feeling pretty good about themselves. But before we go here, because I'm going to wrap up the show real quick, the Celtics, of course, 20-point loss tonight to the Detroit Pistons. Big games coming up on the horizon. We'll start with you, Franco. Any final thoughts on either tonight's game or the weekend ahead here?
Great way to close out this from the All-Star break until up to this moment. Great way to do it. I think being able to pull out a few wins right after the All-Star break to carry over that momentum is fantastic. Obviously, tonight was the final and hardest leg of this trip and for this team, and just being able to bounce back from this win is going to really say a lot for this team, and really carrying out a victory against the Cavaliers and or the Denver Nuggets will say a lot about the Boston Celtics. Obviously, you want to see a stellar performance from Jason Tatum in either of those games, just narrative based, but you'll be able to see these guys playing on prime time, and it's gonna be once they get through this stretch, the schedule kind of lightens up a little bit for them, and then you can get through the rest of the games. But like I've been saying since I've been watching the Cleveland Cavaliers in the NBA standings, them being in the first seed over the Boston Celtics doesn't really sit right with me, even though I'm not going against anything that they've done or discrediting their amazing work they've done this season. Being aggressive at the deadline and being able to bring in more talent really shows that they are the team that wants to compete with the Boston Celtics for that Eastern Conference championship slot. It's a real challenge, especially with their big men, and I really hoping that they can pull out these two, and I think number one seed should be this team's number one goal until game 82 reaches us.
Yeah, for me, I mean, obviously, just a tough one tonight, but obviously, just happy we walked out of it healthy. Hopefully, we can get all our guys back for Friday and Sunday. I mean, obviously, whatever Luke Cornett is dealing with personally is way more important than basketball. I just hope he's doing okay, and we'll see if Jaylen Brown. I assume he'll be ready for Friday and definitely for Sunday, but I just hope we get all our guys in healthy. I'm just from a fan, I'm just excited to see these next 2 games as playoff matchups. Just see like the whole chess game going on. Specifically excited to see on Sunday Jokic play, because we didn't get to see him play the last time we played them. He was like a late scratch. I think he was sick.
Dodged the
And
Celtics entirely. Dodged him.
right.
Michael Malone sent him home.
Yeah, so I mean, it's going to be two good matchups against two teams that the Celtics have been correlated with either the last few seasons or this season. So, yeah, I'm just hoping that we can take back the reins, as everyone said, in front of the home crowd. We're 18-10 so far this season at home. Maybe we'll keep doing that psychological trick where we wear the green jerseys at home just to trick our guys to think that they keep playing on the road. So, I just hope that we can get in the rhythm before at home before the playoffs, because assuming we stay in one of these top two seeds the rest of the season, and assuming that we can make it at least back to the Eastern Conference Finals, we're going to have home court advantage to start off at least the first two rounds of the playoffs. So the big thing for me is, we got all our top six guys back healthy. They're starting to play together more consistently, get back into that rhythm, build back that chemistry that worked so well last season. Let's start to go back on the run at home, rid ourselves of all the struggles from earlier in the season at home and not being able to perform well again in front of the home crowd like last season, which we did so well. So, what better time than now to start and get on a good streak here in front of the home crowd before it's too late. And I hadn't thought about this guy in a while, but shout out to Jalen Rose for being quite present on the broadcast and really standing up for most of the game tonight. I'm sure he would rate the game an 8.1 out of 10 tonight. I had to make the joke there, so yeah, I'll leave you guys with that.
Well, Jalen Rose, what I always respect about Jalen Rose is the fact he still supports his hometown team, regardless of the fact he's played for rivals of his hometown team. I mean, that'd be like any of us who, which I know you guys, you're more hometown to Boston, my hometown over here. I'm from the St. Louis area. But that would ultimately be like any of us. We're all Celtics fans here. Of course, Celtics analysts. We're going to give us our professional title here. Professional. We're as unbiased as
I'm wearing a
possible.
sweatshirt.
Unbiased as possible. To straighten the collar. But ultimately, that would be like us playing for teams like the Raptors or the Sixers, or going out west, we play with the Clippers or whoever, randomly, but still showing up to Celtics games only after your career is over. And that's kind of where Jalen Rose is with the Detroit Pistons. Is he's always in that arena, always repping Detroit basketball, of course. Now Detroit basketball, they handed the Celtics quite the loss tonight. I mean, the Celtics haven't had a game like this since the Mavericks game a couple of weeks ago, but now they're starting to become few and far between moments for the Boston Celtics. If this happened in January, we'd be freaking out, but it was kind of a reset button from the recent success the Celtics have had recently. It kind of gets the Celtics awake and going now for the weekend ahead, where the Celtics, of course, face the Cleveland Cavaliers at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on Friday, and the Denver Nuggets at 1 p.m. Eastern on Sunday. That game will be on ABC. The Friday game will be on ESPN, and the Celtics will be at home for both games at the TD Garden. And of course, we will be here on the Celtics Talk Weekly post-game show covering both games. After the game, for post-game, we will be here having you covered for the entirety of those games on the Celtics Talk Weekly network. But for tonight, that does it for our coverage of Celtics versus Pistons. Thank you all for watching us tonight. Franco, I'm sure you have the music. It never works on my end, so I never hear it, but I'm sure all the lovely listeners out there are hearing it right now. We will have you guys covered for this weekend, but for now, thank you for watching the Celtics Talk Weekly post-game show. And as I always say, go Celtics.